The rain over the Estadio Azteca did not just fall, it reclaimed the arena. A heavy, relentless deluge turned the pitch into a mirror and the air into a cooling mist. Lightning flickered in the Mexican sky, forcing a 1-hour delay that felt like a necessary pause for breath. In the bowels of the stadium, FIFA officials drafted a statement that seemed, for a moment, to prioritize the soul of the game over the demands of the ledger. They announced that the mandatory hydration breaks, the most controversial addition to this tournament, would be suspended for the match between Mexico and Ecuador. The logic was sound. The storm had broken the heat. The players were already shivering in waterlogged kits. There was no medical justification to stop the clock. Then the match began, and the promise evaporated. In the 27th minute, with the temperature dropping and the grass slick with rainwater, the referee blew his whistle. He didn't point for a foul or a corner, he pointed to the benches. Despite the official decree, despite the lack of heat, and despite the integrity of the match, the hydration break happened anyway. It was a moment of crystalline clarity. It revealed that these breaks were never about the water. They were about the window. To understand why a 180-second pause in Mexico City matters, you have to look at the architecture of the lie. For 3 years, FIFA sold the concept of player welfare as the cornerstone of the 2026 World Cup. With matches spread across the vast, sweltering landscapes of North America, the narrative was simple. The heat is dangerous, and we must protect the athletes. It was a noble shield. But shields often hide what the soldier is actually holding. The hydration breaks were designed as 3-minute stoppages at the midpoint of each half. On paper, they are medical interventions. In practice, they are commercial inventory. The Mexico-Ecuador incident wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system functioning with terrifying efficiency, even when the mask of medical necessity had been stripped away by a thunderstorm. The match itself was supposed to be a celebration of Latin American football. Mexico had stormed through Group A, playing with a ferocity that suggested the home soil was giving them wings. Ecuador was the tournament's great survivor, having shocked the world by toppling Germany in a result that will be discussed in Quito for decades. The atmosphere inside the Aztec was primal. This is a cathedral of the sport, a place where Pelé and Maradona were canonized. It is a place where the rhythm of the game is sacred. When Julián Quiñones lashed a right-footed missile into the near post in the 22nd minute, the stadium didn't just cheer, it shook. The momentum was a physical force. Mexico was surging. Ecuador was scrambling. The game was alive. And then, 5 minutes later, the whistle blew. The momentum was murdered. The players looked confused. The fans looked at the sky, where the rain was still falling and the temperature remained a brisk 64 degrees. There was no heat to manage. There was only a schedule to keep. This specific betrayal in Mexico City follows a trail of breadcrumbs that leads directly to the executive suites in Zurich. Go back to December 2024. Manolo Zuberi, FIFA's chief tournament officer, stood before the press to outline the logistical framework of this World Cup. Tucked away in the technical specifications was a confirmation that would change the sport forever. He admitted that commercial broadcasters would be granted the option to run advertising during these mandatory breaks. It was a synergy, he called it. Critics called it a transformation. Football has always been the holdout in the world of televised sports. Unlike American football or basketball, it is a game of continuous flow. 45 minutes of uninterrupted drama. That is the product. That is the pact with the viewer. By introducing these breaks, FIFA didn't just add a timeout, they bifurcated the half. They turned 2 45-minute acts into 4 22-minute segments. They didn't just change a rule, they changed the DNA of the sport structure to accommodate the mid-roll advertisement. The evidence of this commercial priority surfaced on the very first day of the tournament. June 11th, Mexico versus South Africa. The world was watching the opening match with bated breath. When the second-half hydration break was called, the Fox Sports broadcast in the United States immediately cut to a block of commercials. But there was a synchronization error. The advertisements ran long. On the pitch, the players were ready. They were hydrated. They wanted to play. The referee, however, stood with his hand up, staring at a headset. He was waiting. Reports from the touchline, later confirmed by journalist Roma Molina, suggested the match was being held until the broadcast went back to live air. When the whistle finally blew, the fans at home missed the first 10 seconds of play. The game had become secondary to the pitch. The athlete was now a backdrop for the advertiser. We saw it again in Arlington, Texas. England versus Croatia. The match was played at the AT&T Stadium under a closed roof. The climate control was set to a perfect artificial cool. There was no sun. There was no humidity. There was no risk of heat stroke. Yet, like clockwork, the break arrived. The boos from the stands were deafening. Fans who had paid thousands of dollars to see the flow of elite football were forced to watch 30 players stand in a circle and do nothing while the Jumbotron flashed corporate logos. In Atlanta, 67,000 people witnessed the same absurdity during Czechia versus South Africa. The air conditioning was humming. The players were fresh. The break happened anyway. It was becoming clear that the wet bulb globe temperature index, the supposed scientific trigger for these breaks, was being ignored in favor of a clock that always struck revenue at the 22-minute mark. This isn't just about annoyance. It is about the physical and tactical reality of the game. Football is a sport of attrition. It is about who tires first, who loses focus, and who can sustain pressure over a long period. When you introduce a mandatory 3-minute rest in the middle of a half, you bail out the defense. You allow the lungs to recover. You allow the coach to deliver a tactical mid-game adjustment that should have waited for halftime. Didier Deschamps, the French manager, noted this with his usual clinical detachment. He observed that he now had to coach for 4 quarters. He had to plan his substitutions and his pressing triggers around the breaks. Virgil van Dijk, one of the most vocal leaders in the modern game, argued that the blanket application of the rule was nonsensical. If it's hot, stop. If it's not, play. It is a simple logic that a child can understand. Yet it is a logic that a multi-billion-dollar organization refuses to acknowledge. The hypocrisy reached its zenith at the Aztec. When FIFA issued that pre-match statement saying no breaks would occur due to the weather, they were trying to appease the purists. They were trying to show that they were still in control of the medical narrative. But when the 27th minute arrived and the referee stopped the game, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. It suggested that the referee had been told, either by protocol or by a voice in his ear, that the break was non-negotiable. It suggested that the broadcast contracts signed years ago in luxury hotels had more weight than the weather report or the official FIFA communications department. The players on the pitch were mere actors in a play that had already been timed to the second. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. When we look at the history of the World Cup, we see a constant tension between the purity of the sport and the hunger of the institution. In 1994, when the tournament first came to the United States, there were whispers of changing the game to 4 quarters to satisfy American television. The backlash then was so severe that FIFA backed down. They realized the world wasn't ready to see the 90-minute clock dismantled. But 30 years later, they found a way to do it under the guise of compassion. They used the genuine threat of climate change and athlete safety as a Trojan horse. They took a real problem, extreme heat, and used it to install a permanent revenue generator. It is a brilliant, cynical piece of corporate engineering. The cost of this engineering is the loss of the unpredictable continuous. Football's greatest moments often happen in the red zone of the half, those minutes between the 35th and 45th, when the legs are heavy and the mind is tired. That is when the gaps appear. That is when a genius like Messi or a predator like Jimenez finds the space to change history. By inserting a rest period at the 22nd minute, FIFA has effectively deleted the fatigue-driven drama of the mid-half. They have sanitized the struggle. They have created a version of football that is more predictable, more structured, and more profitable, but infinitely less human. The fans feel this. You could hear it in the silence of the Aztec after the break was called. The rain was still coming down in sheets. Mexico was leading 1-0. The energy should have been a rolling thunder. Instead, it was a confused murmur. Even after Raúl Jiménez added the second goal later in the match, a classic towering header that sent the home crowd into a frenzy, there was a sense that something had been stolen. The record of the Aztec remained intact. Mexico has still never lost a World Cup match in that stadium. But the stadium itself felt different. It felt like a stage that was no longer owned by the people or the players. FIFA has remained silent since the Mexico-Ecuador discrepancy. There has been no apology for the miscommunication. There has been no explanation for why a mandatory break happened in a match where it was officially canceled. They don't need to explain it because the money has already been accounted for. The advertisements were shown. The impressions were tracked. The sponsors are happy. In the ledgers of Zurich, the Mexico-Ecuador match was a success. The fact that it felt like a betrayal to the fans and a violation of the game's internal logic is simply the cost of doing business. We are now moving into the knockout rounds. The stakes are higher. A single goal can define a nation's decade. In these moments, the flow of the game isn't just a preference, it is a requirement for justice. If a team is under the cosh, defending for their lives, they should not be rescued by a corporate-mandated hydration break when the temperature is a cool evening breeze. If a team has their opponent on the ropes, they should not have their momentum snapped so a broadcaster can sell insurance or soda. But this is the reality of the 2026 World Cup. The breaks are here to stay, not because the players are thirsty, but because the machine is hungry. The 2026 World Cup was promised to be the biggest, most inclusive, and most player-centric tournament in history. We were told the expanded field of 48 teams would celebrate the global game. We were told the modern stadiums would provide the ultimate experience. But as we watch referees hold the ball while television directors count down from 10, those promises feel hollow. The controlled collapse of football's traditional structure is nearly complete. The game is no longer a river. It is a series of reservoirs, controlled by gates that only open when the price is right. Look at the image of the Aztec in the rain. Thousands of fans in plastic ponchos screaming for their heroes. Players drenched to the bone, fighting for every inch of grass. And in the middle of it all, a referee blowing a whistle to stop a game that didn't need to stop. That image is the epitaph for the sport as we knew it. We are entering an era where the official statement is a mere formality, and the commercial obligation is the only true law. FIFA didn't just break a promise in Mexico City. They revealed that the promise was never theirs to keep. The game belongs to the contracts now. As the tournament progresses to its final stages, we have to ask ourselves what we are willing to accept. Are we okay with a version of football that stops for the highest bidder? Are we okay with medical safety being used as a branding exercise? The rain at the Aztec washed away a lot of things that night, but it couldn't wash away the truth. The hydration break in a storm was the ultimate proof of a system that has lost its way. It was the moment the lie became too big to hide. The whistle will blow again in the 22nd minute of the next match, and the one after that. The players will drink their water. The ads will run. And the game, once a continuous thread of human effort, will continue its slow, profitable fracture. The stadium lights eventually dimmed over the Azteca, leaving the pitch in a ghostly, rain-soaked quiet. The fans filtered out into the Mexico City night, celebratory but perhaps a little less certain of what they had just witnessed. They saw their team win, but they also saw the machinery of the modern game grind a sacred rhythm into dust. The grass will dry, and the tournament will move on to the next city, the next stadium, and the next scheduled interruption. We are left to wonder if the 90-minute dream is gone for good. Can the soul of the sport survive the death of its flow? Is this still the game we loved?